builds character. Everyone should make and immediately lose a few $1,000,000 in their life. You learn important things.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Phil, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You're well known as the co-founder and former CEO of Evernote, probably the world's best known note-taking app. And of course, you're also building new companies these days. Before we talk about your Evernote success and what you're working on these days, I want to focus on your personal background. You actually studied computer science in Boston in the early 90s, and you then decided to leave university before you actually graduated. Why was the timing right to do so?
Well, I actually did graduate later. I graduated in 2019. I got my bachelor's degree 2 years ago.
Nice.
Boston University, Computer Science, 2019. It took me 30 years exactly. I entered the school in 1989, and I got my bachelor's degree 30 years later in 2019. So I'm the world's slowest bachelor student.
That's sort of another a cool world record to have. But why was it the right timing back then when you decided to leave university and pursue your entrepreneurial career instead?
I don't think it was the right timing. I think I just got angry at the university for something and, lost my temper and stormed out. I don't think it was a particularly smart thing to do. I was young and impulsive back then. It didn't seem to matter that much because, I was working as an engineer. There was, I didn't really see what the point of sticking around was, but if I had to do it over again, of course I would have finished it, which is why I went back 30 years later and finished it.
Fair point. So. Where does actually your entrepreneurial spirit come from that you decided to go down that path instead of finishing university? Where do you have any role models or any inspiration?
Well, I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I wasn't trying to do that. I thought I would, have a job. I thought I would be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or something growing up. And it just wasn't working out. I mean, I went into computer science and I was pretty good as a programmer, but it was hard to work for, in big companies. And so I just starting my own things with friends of mine. But it always felt like we were just failing. It felt like the reason we were starting our own companies because we couldn't get real jobs. So it wasn't probably until I'd been doing it for 20 years or something that I realized, actually, it's not so bad. Maybe this is a legitimate career path after all.
But that sounds like a very tough decision to take. If you pursue the path where you think you're not particularly good at, or you have the impression that you're failing, what kept you going in those moments? Because that must have been a really, really difficult time to pull through.
We always had, I think I had a kind of a clear idea at any given time of things that I wish existed in the world, products or companies that I kind of, thought the world needed. And my motivation has just always been to build the stuff that I wish existed. It wasn't really much more complicated than that. And it was, I was doing it with friends. My first three companies had a pretty much the same group of co-founders, and it's still even to this day. I'm on my fifth company now, and there's a lot of people that I've been working with for a long time, and a lot of new people. And so it was it felt like I could work with people that I liked versus just having a job where I had no control over who I was working with, and we could try to build things that we thought the world needed. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do. So, and we didn't really think too much about it. We didn't have big aspirations to, start massive companies or change the world.
In that regard, were you solving your own problems? Were you building solutions to problems that you experienced yourself, or what was the motivator behind that?
At Evernote we were, but that was already my third company. The first two companies, the first company was called Engine 5, and it was one of the really early .com companies. We built some of the very first e-commerce sites. You could buy stuff on the internet. It was kind of a novel idea. We started that in '97, which was right kind of at the height of the .com, the first .com bubble. Everyone was running around and saying .com. The motivation there was just we wanted to make a company, which I think is actually a really bad motivation. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But we were just curious. We were just like, well, if we just make a company and we can decide who we want to work with and who we don't want to work with, and it was just kind of a social experiment. But my Geach and Brandon were my two co-founders, and we were all engineers. And back then there was so much work available that if you knew how to program, you could people would just pay you to do it. So we didn't think too much about what we'd be working on. We just brought our computers into a rented office and started coding. And it turned out that it was e-commerce because that's what people wanted back then. But so that one wasn't really solving our own problems. It was solving problems. So like we worked for Nokia. I remember one of our big clients was Nokia. We built one of their first e-commerce sites. And then my second company we started a month after September 11th. We started on October 11th of 2001, and that was much more about solving some important security problems that we thought the world needed, and not so much ours. Our customers were banks and governments. And so for the first two companies, it was really about, waking up every day and wondering, like, what does the customer want? And we just got really tired of it. And that's why when we started Evernote, we said, we just don't care what the customer wants anymore. We want to build for us. We want to say, we're the customer. Let's build what we want. Let's stop thinking about what does a retailer want or what does a bank want. So Evernote was the first time that we built for ourselves, solving our own problems, and it's interesting. It's interesting when you get to do that.
Amazing. I want to talk about the impressive Evernote story in a second, but before that, at just 30 years old, you actually had your first decent exit and sold the company for $26 million. Has the money changed you in any way? Because making that much money at such a young age, that can be quite life-changing.
Yeah, it was definitely life-changing. I never had any money before. My family never really had any money. We were refugees to the U.S. From the Soviet Union when I was 8. So we grew up pretty poor. We were on government assistance, and my parents were both classical musicians. So there was never really any history of making money, although they were socially respectable in the Soviet Union. There wasn't any wealth. So yeah, I think I realized at one point when we sold that company that I think I made more money all of a sudden than like all of my ancestors going back to caveman days put together probably ever had. It was weird. It was a weird sensation, and it was nice but it was very liberating. It was nice to think that I hopefully will never have to do anything I don't want to do. I had no intention of retiring. I still wanted to work. I still want to work, but I had no, the money gave me the freedom to think about it. I never have to do anything. I never have to have a job I don't like again. So from now on, I kind of thought all of my jobs will be jobs that I like, and that was pretty great.
Nice. Did you do anything particular with the money that you made from that deal? Did you, purchase anything specific or any big wish that you were now able to fulfill?
I mean, I lost the vast majority of it because we sold the company in January of 2000, which was about 20 minutes before the dot-com bubble burst, and so we got $26 million, and it was half in cash and half in stock of the company that bought us. The company that bought us called Vignette. The half that we put in stock, when the company bought us, I think they were worth like $10 billion. And then 2 years later, they were worth like, I don't know, 50 million. So the stock fell by, 99.5 or something percent. So that basically got wiped out. And then the cash we got, we mostly thought, hey, we're really investment geniuses because, we sold this company, so we really understand technology. So we invested most of it into other startups, and most of those went out of business, over the same 2 years. So we wound up losing almost all the money we got. We got about, it was funny, the only reason we kept any money out of that was 25% of the total price. When the company bought us, they told us that they have to hold 25% in escrow, kind of in reserve for 2 years, just to make sure that there's no problems. And at first I thought, no, it's ridiculous. Like, it's our money. You can't have our money for 2 years. Give it to us right away. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. So we agreed to it, and they held 25% for 2 years in escrow. And so 2 years later, when we left, we got the escrow payment, and that 25% was still sitting there earning, 3% a year. So that was still worth some money, whereas the other 75% all went away. So we were able to get out of it with some value, but only because adults couldn't trust us with the money for 2 years, and we got very lucky.
So in the end, that was actually a pretty good setup.
Only reason we came out of it with any cash, so it was only a few $1,000,000 at that point. But it's still enough to make a big difference. But it was interesting to like make so much money kind of overnight and then really lose just about all of it. You know, within the next year or so. It was kind of an interesting roller coaster.
How did that make you feel? Losing most of the money that you made. Did that change you in any way, or was that really a big frustration, or didn't you really care that much about it?
Well, I think I pretended not to care very much. So
Okay.
I think we all got good at like saying, "Yeah, it doesn't really matter." And but of course, deep down, it's it's pretty unpleasant, pretty painful. But I think it's it builds character. Everyone should make and immediately lose a few $1,000,000 in their life. It's, you learn important things.
I can imagine. And I also wonder, despite the 25% not being the full 100%, but it was still some pretty decent money that you made there that also gave you the freedom. Why did you then decide to continue building companies and not just enjoying life or not working that much after all?
Um, well, the second company was we were all very motivated. I think like a lot of people were after 9/11 to do something meaningful. We really wanted to at that point contribute to the world. We thought there was some opportunity for us to make some important advancements in the way that security was done, the way that authentication was done, that would just make the world a little bit safer. And it was a weird time. I think back then there was a lot of people who were very motivated to do this, and so we started the second company mostly because we had this. We had this great co-founder from MIT, this very famous professor, Professor Sylvia Macaulay, who had invented some cryptographic techniques that really became an important part of the security landscape, and we thought we would productize it. I ran that company for about 7 years, and it was definitely like working in the security field is more. It sounds more glamorous than it really is. It was pretty boring. And then after that, like Evernote was just kind of it seemed like a natural outcome. We just thought, all right, the last two companies we spent all this time thinking about what do customers want, and just like the first company was a social experiment to see, can we just make a company, what will happen? The third company, Evernote, was kind of a social experiment just to see, well, if we just made a product for ourselves, what would happen?
Yeah, actually, Evernote was founded in 2007. So can you take us back to the early days? What did Evernote focus on back then, and how did it look like?
Well, so after we got out of our second company, Core Street, kind of sat around trying to decide what we want to build, that we're really interested in, and we settled on this idea of cognitive prosthesis. We called it a second brain, build something to make you smarter. And when we started doing research, we ran into this other team in California, led by this brilliant Russian-American inventor and entrepreneur named Stepan Pachikov. And he had a team of people that had worked on, some of your listeners remember this, the Apple Newton back in the day. It was like the very first kind of tablet, and they had handwriting recognition. It was way too advanced for its time. So they had a team working on a very similar vision, and a company that they actually called Evernote, spelled a little bit differently. And I met Stepan, and we decided to just kind of combine our teams rather than having two startups compete with each other. So I kind of brought my team. We were in Boston, and brought them to Silicon Valley, to San Francisco, and we reformed a new entity that we then called Evernote. And so the modern Evernote was started in about 2007. And the product vision was pretty consistent from what it became. Like we figured out in the first couple of months what we wanted to build. And it was pretty close to what we wound up building over the next 4 or 5 years.
Wow, that's impressive, because usually you see a lot of pivoting happening until you find the right market or the right fit to the problem that you're trying to solve. But you focus on your own needs and your own problems, and that sort of seemed to resonate with your user base.
Yeah, I think it resonated with the user base, and also I think we made some good decisions early on. When we were thinking about, well, who are we building it for? Who's the target audience? And we said, well, it's us. We're the target audience. We want it to be really good for us. And we said, okay, well, but what about after that? Like can't just be for us. Like, what other kinds of people is it really good for? And we specifically decided that we wanted to make it great for two types of people. We wanted to make it great for journalists, and we wanted to make it great for investors, because we thought journalists and investors are kind of classic knowledge workers. It's like a perfect example of a job that, you have to just process a lot of information and remember a lot of things and keep things together. Plus, we thought for a startup, like if we want two people to be nice to us, it's going to be journalists and investors. So we kind of decided to build a product that journalists would like and investors would like, and that it really paid off, because every investor we talked to after the first year was using it and really liked it, and every journalist that I ever interviewed with was using it to take notes, and so it was a much friendlier environment because we just happened to build a product for these two classes of people.
That sounds amazing. Now, I also wonder if you compare your experience from the first two companies and then also Evernote, first focusing on what the user wants or what the market needs, and for the third one with Evernote, focusing on your own problems, on your own needs, and building a product for yourself. Which way do you think is the better way to go about building a product and eventually a company around it?
Well, I think building for yourself is kind of like a shortcut. It's sort of like a cheat code. It's like if you're playing, a video game and you like find the cheat code that makes you go faster. That's really what it feels like. It really makes you go much faster, just because of the timing. I think if you need to build a really excellent product, it takes a lot of iterations to build something really excellent. Let's say it takes 10,000 iterations to build something really excellent. Well, if each cycle takes a long time, like for example, when we were selling to the government, to like militaries and banks, each iteration took about a year and a half, because we would like sell a product to the Pentagon and like deploy it, and then they would have a formal review, and then like basically 18 months would go by in between revisions. So you got to do it 10,000 times. It's a year and a half. It's like 15,000 years before you're going to make a really excellent product. And I don't want to wait 15,000 years. But if you make it for ourselves, like at Evernote, each iteration can be like 20 minutes. Because as long as you're being really honest with yourself, you can say, every time you make a tiny change, you can say like, well, did this make it better or worse? So your feedback cycles become much, much tighter, much smaller. You can get through that 10,000 iterations in a couple of years, not 15,000. And so I think building stuff for yourself is a massive, massive shortcut. It lets you get through many more iterations faster. There's also significant downsides of it. So I don't think that one way is particularly better than the other. I think it's important to be kind of aware, which is which, and choose what you're doing based on what you're trying to optimize for.
What are the downsides that you experienced when building your product based on your own needs?
Well, the main one is that, there's a lot of people in the world that deserve to have their problem solved more than we do. And if you're just building products for your own problems, like it's a very narrow slice of things, and it doesn't really, doesn't necessarily improve the world as much as it should be. I think that's the main big picture downside. And then this is one of the problems I think in Silicon Valley is so many of the ideas are really meant for the people in the valley, and they're not that important as ideas. Tactically speaking, there's a lot of problems. If you're literally just building for yourself, and we ran into this at Evernote, if you're literally just building for yourself, then at some point you stop building things for new users, because none of you are new users. We were all Evernote experts, and so everything we built was for expert users. And then it turned out that new people have no idea how to even start, because we haven't focused on that in a while. So there's things like that. You have to, at some point, if you're just building for yourself, it's just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So you have to force yourself to go broader. And after Evernote, I really didn't. For my next several companies, I specifically wasn't building things for myself. All Turtles, the product studio we started with, really focuses on problems for other people and other types of people, and it's slower like that. When you're building for other people, you really have to understand them better, and it takes longer to do each iteration. And then, my newest company. Since it started as a joke, we weren't intending on building it as a company. We are again building it for ourselves, because it's just a joke. We were just fooling around. And then I remembered, oh yeah, it really does go a lot faster if you build for yourself. So now I'm back to building things for myself after 10 years of specifically avoiding it. Yeah,
that's so impressive how you go back and forth between the two setups here. it's not like you always do the same setup over and over again. You always switch the gear, basically. Another really interesting thing is you mentioned also the timing. So you basically started Evernote right 1 year before the financial crisis. You sold your previous company just before the dot-com bubble burst. And I just wonder, the timing is such a crucial factor for startups. Is there any tip based on your experience how startups can better understand or also better work with the timing to get it right, or to at least have a positive timing as good as that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, the timing is super important. It's probably the most important thing, and you can only control it to some extent. There's a big element of luck in it, so it's hard to make too much of it. There's a couple of frameworks that we have now for thinking about it that tries to help a little bit. One is for all turtles, for everything that we work on, we only want to work on things that we can bring to market for real, like a first version, in 12 to 18 months. So like 18 months the longest for like the initial go to market. We don't want to work on something that's going to take a 5-year science project or something. Other people should. Yeah. We're just not set up for that. Mm-hmm. So we work on things that we can get to market for real this year, like in a year, but in a way that would have been impossible had we tried to do it 2 or 3 years ago. So we specifically look for that window. We ask, like, what's changed in the world to make this approach possible this year for the first time ever? Where if we tried it 2 years ago, it would have been crazy, couldn't do it. But this year is like the first year that it can actually get done like this. So that's a pretty specific way of looking at the timing. Like, you just need to answer that question. You need to say, was your idea possible to execute 3 years ago? And if it was, like, possible, like pretty much the same way as it is now. And if it was, then, that's kind of suspicious, because like probably many other people have tried to do it and you're probably too late. On the other hand, if it's still not possible to do it right now, then, you're probably going to fail because you're not going to succeed building something impossible. Startups just don't have that kind of run rate. They don't have that kind of patience. Google can work on something that may not pay off for 10 years or 5 years, but a startup, for the most part, can't, unless you just raise, a colossal amount of money. So we very specifically say, what are the new things? What are the significant new changes in the world, in the available technologies, but also just changes in society? Obviously, COVID was a massive change in society. What new things are possible this year that you couldn't do before? And that's a good start. There's still a lot of luck involved, but at least you're starting from something plausible.
I like that a lot. Do you have a good example to walk us through the thinking process that you just described?
Yeah, I mean, is a good example. The newest company. If we tried to do it, if we tried to do it 2 years ago, well, 3 years ago, we started it last year. So if we tried to start it, 3 years ago instead of last year, would have failed because, one is a lot of the video processing and the computer vision and the machine learning we do is just like really gotten much more advanced. So there's just a lot that we can do kind of off the shelf that would have required, Google level investment before, but 2 years later, it was just possible to do it with just very good general engineers. But more importantly, society wouldn't have cared. If we'd launched, 2 years earlier, who cares? Video just wasn't that big a thing. But because of COVID, everyone was forced to be on it. It was such a massive change. So that was probably the best timing for it that I've ever had so far. Because we started working on it immediately when the pandemic started. Well, like in May, we started working on it in May of 2020. And so it was very, it was one of the first like new things that was native to COVID. But it let us kind of think through things with new eyes. And at the same time, it took advantage of a lot of technology that was only developed, the past year or two. But it was the same thing with Evernote. Like had we started Evernote, so we started in 2007. iPhone had just come out. AWS wasn't available yet, but there was already a little bit of cloud stuff, happening. If we started it, 2 years earlier, like there'd be nothing. Like what would we develop it on? We'd have to develop it on BlackBerry or something, but that ecosystem didn't exist. There was no app stores, so like Evernote was a good example. The society hadn't changed very much. There's nothing that magical in 2007, but the technology really did advance. Where I think we could not have built Evernote having started 2 years earlier, but when we started, we could do it. And this I think almost every successful startup has that example, or very many do. I think if you look at Uber, I don't think you could have started Uber 2 years before, they started Uber, because, didn't have ubiquitous GPS and smartphones. It wouldn't work. Imagine
Right.
if Uber, if you had to put in, exactly where you were, it would have so much friction. Plus, the payment methods weren't very good yet. You'd have to it would be like much harder to pay and much harder to call cars, like way too much, friction. I think Airbnb, probably couldn't have started for similar reasons than earlier. So I think a lot of successful companies have this right, whether they were thinking about it ahead of time or not. They started something in the first year that it was possible to do it, and now we just try to do that on purpose. We just specifically say what's possible now this year for the first time, and that's a filter that we apply. But oftentimes you just look at that retroactively, and it just happens to have worked out.
Yeah, beautiful examples on the importance of timing. You also described yourself as rigorous optimism. In what way does that also influence or interfere with the timing question?
Well, I think rigorous optimism is it's kind of a way to orient myself with the world. It basically says that like I'm not. I'm. It's interesting. Like I'm an optimist. I really believe that the world can be made much better and will be made much better. But I'm also like in my personal life, like I'm not a very cheerful person. Like I'm kind of mopey. I'm kind of melancholy. I think it's a distinction that sometimes surprises people. Like you don't have to be personally, sunny all the time to be an optimist. And for me, the distinction is rigorous optimism. I think the world will and can be made much better, but you have to do it. Like it's not just going to happen. You can't just like sit back and wait. You have to make a plan, one thing at a time, and go and do it. And if you say, well, it's my job. It's my job to solve this problem because we can't wait for other people to do it. Then it's okay. And the world, I think a lot of people have a significant amount of agency. People can do more than they think they can. With that approach, I think too many people either wait for somebody else to do something, or they're pessimists. And I think neither of those are very useful orientations.
And that's also something that seems to really annoy you, because I think also in a different interview you said the biggest problem in the world is wasted potential. Could you elaborate a bit more on that perspective?
I think I was maybe talking about Russia in particular. I think I got a lot of hate mail. I think it was a Russian interview, and I think the reporter asked me what I thought about Russia, and I said it's wasted potential. Yeah, I guess maybe I've insulted even more countries that way. Maybe I have said it for the whole world. It's hard to remember. But yeah, I do think that. Look, I think it's a tragedy. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential in people. That really brilliant people, like amazingly talented people, are very rare by definition. You can't, like, if exceptionally talented people were common, they wouldn't be exceptional. So exceptionally talented people are super rare. But I think they're everywhere. I think they're evenly distributed throughout the world, and most of them are wasted because in most parts of the world, in most societies, they don't know what to do with really talented people. If they crop up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and if they crop up near Stanford, then everyone knows, oh, this is one of these like really rare mushrooms, and they know how to take care of it. And if you're a super talented person, you happen to have like popped up near Stanford, like you can get venture money and mentorship and everything else. And if you pop up in, lots of other places in the world, they could just kind of step on you. They don't understand. And I think I think it's a tragedy. I think the world could be so much better if we found ways to give every exceptionally talented person the same opportunity to use their talent to change the world as the exceptionally talented people in Silicon Valley get. And that's one of the things that we try to do at Old Turtles, obviously in a very small way. And I think is true. Is true in general.
Nice. I want to also focus on 2015. Again, the timing question. That was the year when you decided to step down from your CEO role at Evernote. Why was the timing right to step down and to say, hey, I'm done being the CEO for that company?
Well, I think I wasn't enjoying it very much, and I was having lunch or something somewhere, and I think it was actually Nick Woodman, who was the founder of GoPro. Kind of sat down next to me. We had been friends on and off. We hadn't seen each other in a year or so. And he said, "Hey, like, how are you doing? Are you still having fun?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't think I'm having fun." And he said, "I said that's bullshit. Like, you shouldn't be doing anything that you're not enjoying." He said, "At this point in your life, like, you should only do things that you're enjoying, because if you're not enjoying it, it probably means you're not very good at it." Or you're not as good as you can be. And at this point, the company is successful enough where you can get someone who would be better than you, who would enjoy it. And I thought that made a lot of sense. So I thought, if we were having, again, back to timing, this was in 2015. If we were having this discussion in 2011, then I'm probably the best CEO Evernote could have gotten at that point, because who cares? It wasn't that successful or interesting a company. But a few years later, it was well known. It had hundreds of millions of users. And I thought, yeah, now we can get a better CEO, and I should be the person that does that. And then I thought I would change my role so that I'd bring someone in to be the CEO to run the company day to day, and I would kind of stay in the background and have product thoughts and that kind of stuff. And I knew that was it was always possible that doesn't work out, because once there's a new CEO, like, who knows how personalities will work themselves out. And so we spent a while. We spent over a year looking, and we brought on Chris O'Neill, a new person, as the CEO, and I kind of became the executive chairman. But after a few months, it was obvious that it was just like it was too weird. Like, it was difficult for me, and it was difficult for him, like, having me kind of like hanging around. So I thought the best thing was just to kind of separate myself from it. But in terms of timing, it was an easy decision. It was just like, yeah, I'm not enjoying it. That means that I'm probably not as good as what the company can get, and the company's successful enough where we can find someone better. So let's find someone better.
So yeah, timing wise, that makes a lot of sense. How do you handle that emotionally? I could imagine, stepping down as CEO and then also eventually leaving the company completely. That can be challenging on an emotional level. How do you handle that?
Yeah, it was very unpleasant emotionally, and I think, but I think this is like an important thing, and maybe it's like the most important like CEO skill that I figured out, which is whenever I catch myself thinking like, oh, this is a hard decision, like about anything, and I wind up thinking like, this is a hard decision, this is a hard question. I've trained myself that an alarm always goes off in my head, and I think, okay, is it a hard question, meaning that it's hard to know what the correct answer is? Or is it a hard question, meaning that I know what the correct answer is, but it's just unpleasant? And I realize that most of the time when I feel that something's hard, it's actually not hard to know what the right answer is. It's just unpleasant. And I try to discriminate between those two things. I try to discriminate between decisions that are actually like very difficult to know the correct answer from decisions that the right answer is pretty obvious. It's just unpleasant. And once I started looking at this like this, I realized that 90% of the time that I think something's a hard question, it actually is an unpleasant question, but it's not hard. And of course, as a CEO, like, who cares how pleasant it is? You just have to do it. You have to do what the correct thing is. So you just do it. You just decide what the correct thing is, and you do it. And you realize it's going to be unpleasant. And it is, and it's difficult, but you don't pretend otherwise. And I think that framework, like distinguishing questions that it's difficult to know the correctness from questions that are just unpleasant in their consequences, I think that's a very useful skill set that I'm definitely glad that I learned that. Evernote, leaving Evernote was that example, perfect example of that.
I love that perspective and that framework. Do you have any tips how then to navigate personally through the unpleasant, time or decision that you have to take? Any tips on how to navigate that as an individual?
I mean, a lot of that just takes practice, right? Like anything else that's like, like anything, it takes practice. You have to do it. You have to, make mistakes. Um, I think, in general, like being a founder, and being a CEO is a pretty, it's a pretty damaging, thing. I think a lot of people kind of take it for granted. I think that the example that I've been thinking about more recently is like, let's imagine that you're like a great skier. Let's say you're 20 years old and you're like an amazing skier, like Olympic level skier. And I'm not. I've been skiing like once in my life, never going skiing again. But like, let's just say you're a great skier and you're skiing, bumps, and when you do it, you kind of know that you're like damaging your knees because, like, of course, your knees are going to get banged up. Your knees are hardware. It's fine. You can take care of yourself, but you kind of decide that it's worth it because you're 20 and you heal fast and whatever. And now let's say 30 years go by. Now you're 50. No one thinks that you're a better skier at 50. No one says, "Oh, you've got 30 years of skiing experience. It must be so much easier for you," right? Like you're like, well, yeah, I guess in some ways you have 30 more years of skiing experience. So in some ways you're a better skier at 50 than at 20, but in like almost all important ways you're not because you've had 30 years of damage to your knees. And people kind of intuitively understand that because they think that knees are hardware. It makes sense, but somehow our society thinks that your brain is software. And it's not. There's nothing magical about your brain. It's just hardware, just like your knees, and it gets banged up and it gets damaged. And being a founder and a CEO is pretty brutal. It's pretty damaging because you're constantly. It's very high stress. You're constantly in fight or flight mode. And I think a lot of us learn a lot of bad habits in our 20s because we assume that we just don't understand that it's difficult. And then we keep doing it the same way. It's like if when you're 50, you still think you're 20 and you're trying to ski the same way. Like I can't CEO the same way now as I could when 30 years ago. I have to do it differently. So I have to like acknowledge that this just has to be different. And yeah, I try to like take care of my brain in the process. Like I'm in this nice cabin by the lake right now for a week because I can work from here and it's nice. But more importantly than taking care of yourself, I think it's just the realization that like it has to change. You have to be a different kind of CEO. You have to be a different kind of founder. You can't do it the same way at 50 as you could at 20. And then it's okay. I just think that a lot of popular society and like entrepreneurship society and that kind of stuff just people don't take this seriously enough.
Wow. I mean, I'm just impressed how you can address those tough things and almost make them sound easy because it's so clear what you have to do.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that's like, it's the difficult versus unpleasant, right? Like, yeah, this is clearly what happens. You may not like it, but it's the right thing.
So I also want to talk a bit more about the future. You already mentioned your current, startup that you're working on. So what do you have? What are your future plans with? What do you want to do with the company? Where do you want to go?
Well, the big change I think that's happening in the world right now is we're calling it out of office. I think like the out of office world is what we're building now as society, and it's a really big change. This idea that for most of us, beforehand, there was this thing called the office that really dominated our lives. For almost everyone, during the very middle of the day, during most of the week, you had to go to the central place and you had to commute, and it was like it dominated the center of your life for decades, and it literally forced everything else out to the sides. It forced out, family and friends and self-care and art and music. It was like you had to do those on the weekends or on vacations because like the office was like this major thing. And now, for the first time, we have an opportunity to dismantle that and to say knowledge workers can work whenever we want, and we can work from wherever we want, and we can construct a life that is much better, and we can be much more productive in doing it. And so it's really out of office. Like, this is the movement. I think, and when I say out of office, I kind of want you to hear it as if I'm saying out of jail. Like, it's a similar thing. It's like there used to be this big thing in the middle of your life that dominated your existence and that really constrained what you could do. And now you're free from it and you can do whatever you want, and you can just have a better life as a result. And I think we're trying to build kind of the essential tools for this out of office world. How do you communicate in a way that's much more productive than ever before, regardless of whether you're in the same place as people or far away, regardless of whether it's live, like you and I are doing right now, or recorded, regardless of whether you're the only person in the company that's not in the office or everyone is out. We just want to create the new generation of video superpowers so that as many people as possible can take advantage of the out of office lifestyle.
Great. And now this out of office, this new lifestyle, you spend your week at the cabin by the lake. How do you want to design your life out of office? How should your life look like? What's ideal for you in that regard?
Yeah, I think just asking that question is super important for yourself, because I've never had an opportunity in my life before to ask that question. Because even where should I live? I never really thought, where do I want to live before, because it wasn't that important to me, because obviously where I wanted to live was entirely constrained by the job. So the question really was, where did I want to work? But now you can live wherever you have the best life, and you can work wherever you have the best job, and they don't have to be connected. If you work for the right kind of company, or you make the right kind of company. And so I'm just enjoying having that opportunity to make those decisions separately. How do I want to work separately from how do I want to live, and where do I want to live? And then not just for me, but everyone in my company, everyone in all of our companies can do this. And so we're figuring out, how do we give this opportunity to everyone, to all of our employees, and then how do we learn from it? Because it isn't automatic. There's all sorts of things that we have to learn to get good at in order for this to really be true. But for me, yeah, so I moved from San Francisco to Bentonville, Arkansas, which is lovely. It's beautiful, and then this cabin is about 40 minutes away. So it's I have a nice home set up normally, but I don't just work from home. I work from 3 or 4 different places, and I choose where to go. I've walked everywhere, so they're all within a 10-minute walk. And sometimes I work from home. Sometimes I work from this beautiful museum called Crystal Bridges. If I need to do something creative by myself or with other people, we'll go walking through Crystal Bridges, or we'll use one of their rooms. And it's just amazing to be so surrounded by art and nature. Sometimes I work from the pool. There's a great club with a pool and a gym and conference room, so I can work from there and then go swimming in between Zoom calls. So I've been picking my physical locations to optimize for what I'm trying to accomplish over a few hours, and I go to a few different places, which I think is great, and I walk to all of them. And then I spend most of our communications now are asynchronous, probably 70 to 80% are async, which just means recordings, which we've just got really good at over the past few months. And then about 15% are like you and I are doing. It's live, electronic, but live, like synchronous.
Right.
And we've gotten much better at those because we build tools that does both of those things really well. And then about 5% are in person. And the in-person ones, we really try to say it has to count. Like if I'm going to meet with someone in person, it has to be special. We're not going to sit in a room and share slides with each other. That's stupid. That's better done on video. So we're going to meet in person. There's always food. There's always dinner. There's always company. The in-person stuff really is we try to make it count. And it's been great. I feel much more productive over the past year than I've ever been. Not just me, but I think a lot of people at my companies. We've definitely accomplished a lot. So I feel really productive, and at the same time, I feel like I have a healthier work-life balance than I've ever had. And at the same time, it's actually much more affordable, because right now, 100% of the people that work at our companies can afford to, live in the house that I'm currently living in and work out of the same club, because it's not, it's not that expensive when you spread it out a little bit more. When I was living in San Francisco, that wasn't true. When I was living in San Francisco, my quality of living was much lower than it is right now. But even though the only reason it was even as good as it was is because I was spending so much more money than the average person in my company. So it was not very good objectively, but also much more exclusive. Most people that worked with me couldn't afford to live where I live in San Francisco. But now it's actually better than it ever was, and it's much more accessible to everyone. So I think it's a magical transformation of the world. So this out of office world, I think, taken to its logical conclusion, is is one of the best things that's ever happened to humanity.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like a big win for everybody involved there.
I think so, yeah, and but we have to answer a lot of questions to really make it stick and make it work well, and
Sure.
that's what we're in the process of doing.
Absolutely. And my last question for the formal part of the interview today is, do you have any ultimate goal or any bucket list items that you want to check personally on your entrepreneurial career or in your life?
Well, I've never taken a company public, and that seems like it'd be fun, or it'd be nice to do. So, if situation permits itself, I would like to have and or alternatives be public companies, just because I think it's I don't know. I think like the promise of a public company is kind of elegant. I like the idea of anyone who wants to be an owner to be able to be an owner. I think that's a nice sort of democratic process. So, I don't think it's that important. So if that's not the best direction to go, that's fine. But everything else being equal, I'd like to take a company public at least once or twice.
I think that's a great goal to have. Now, before we wrap up today's episode, I also like to ask you about your personal resources and gadgets recommendations. Do you have any books, blogs, newsletters, or anything else that comes to mind that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly using and getting and reading just kind of all sorts of things. I've done a lot of work on health stuff. I've really tried to kind of get my own health in much better order the past few years. So I've tried every type of wearable and everything else. I think the thing that I got the most value from that a lot of people, that's still kind of new for most people, is I once in a while I wear a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, which is not really intended for generally healthy people. It's usually for people that are either pre-diabetic or diabetic, but you learn a lot. There's a lot of information that comes from it in terms of how different foods affect you. Those have been very useful. So if anyone is curious about health optimization, I suggest kind of researching and looking into a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. That's probably like, everything else is like fairly standard, Apple Watches and Oura Rings and all that stuff. I just got a new Kindle. Every couple of years I get like a physical Kindle, and I always love it. And I don't know, I forget about it or something. So I just got a new one yesterday that just came out, and I'm really happy with it. So I've already read just in the past 24 hours a lot more than I normally do, because I've been sitting outside on my deck in the cabin and reading the non the Kindle display is just so much nicer. So I think that's going to be my new favorite thing for the next couple of weeks is reading books on the Kindle.
What are you currently reading?
Currently reading a book called 1491, which is a history of the civilizations in the Americas. In 1491, the year before Columbus came over. So it's kind of a new appraisal of the sort of pre-Columbian history, which is totally different from how I learned it when I was in school. Apparently, everything that we were taught about what the indigenous tribes were doing before Columbus in the U.S. was just wrong. So it was kind of fascinating to read this stuff and be like, oh, I haven't thought about this in school. And yeah, everything I learned in school just turns out to have not been correct. So very, very good book. I recommend it.
Great. And for the very last part, I have some rapid fire questions prepared for you. So I either give you a short question or a selection, and you have to either make a choice or an answer in one sentence. Are you ready?
Yep.
What makes a good life from your perspective?
I think I'd like to have, the world notice, the world be a slightly better place because I existed in it. Make an impact of some kind that's small but measurable.
Nice. Founder or investor?
I don't think I'm a very good investor. Well, that's not true. I'm not a very good VC. My investment track record is actually pretty good, but I wasn't interested in doing it as a job. I think the difference between those two things is you can invest, you just invest your money. If you're a venture capitalist, it's a job. That's what you'd have to do professionally. I'm not particularly good at that, so definitely founder.
Where do you go to think?
I'm always thinking. I don't think I have a place where I'm not thinking. I think I go to different places to think differently about stuff. So, Right now I want to do some writing and some slower ideas, and so I go to the cabin by the lake, the Beaver Lake, and I sit on the swing and on the deck. But that's a particular type of thinking. If I'm trying to like much more creatively do product design and solve problems, I go to a museum. I go to Crystal Bridges Museum. So it really just depends. I try to pick the location based on what I'm trying to accomplish to be best for that thing. I think the office was never good for anything. The office as an environment was always like the lowest common denominator. Like it wasn't optimal for any type of interaction. It was just like where you can get everyone together. So now that we're out of office, we can choose, instead of having one place, we can choose optimal places for the kind of thinking that we want to do.
Nice. Health, wealth, or happiness?
That's a good question. I none of those. I think impact.
Wow. That's a nice answer. That was not on the list, but that's certainly a good answer. What makes you happy?
I don't know. The new Star Wars cartoon, Star Wars Visions that Disney put out, made me pretty happy. Those some really good ones. I was pretty happy about that.
And the last thing to choose from for you: North America, Europe, or Russia?
I mean, for where I want to live, I think I live in North America now, and because I generally like it. I think I'd like to get a place in Tokyo, though, in Japan. Well, not Tokyo, in Kanazawa. So I think my next place, at least for a few months of the year, I think I want to be in Japan.
Wow, nice. Why Japan?
Just love the food. I love the culture. It's kind of a different speed than I spend a lot of time in Japan, or at least I used to before the pandemic. I haven't been back in 2 years. I really miss it, but so I'm going to start going back soon. And it'd be nice to get a nice quiet place by the shore in Kanazawa, Japan, and just eat my weight in crabs every year.
That's a nice vision. Phil, thank you so much for having us here and for your time. Lots of success and all the best for the future. And we hope to see you ringing the stock market bell one day in the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.